My own son planned my funeral without telling me. His wife called it a kindness. They extended my hospital stay, told the doctors I was declining, and prepared to bury me before I even opened my eyes. But I didn't die. I woke up, and when I found out what they did, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. This is how I made them wish I had stayed asleep. Before I begin, thank you for listening to my story. Let me know in the comments where and what time you're tuning in from. Means more than you know. It reminds me that I'm not alone in this. And if you'd like to share your story with me, feel free to email it. I'll drop my email in the description below. Now let me tell you what really happened. They were choosing floral arrangements for my funeral, while I was still alive in the next room. I heard Bianca say something about lilies being too plain and suggesting orchids instead. Tyrone mumbled something about pricing. They thought I was asleep. Thought I couldn't hear through that thin hospital room divider curtain. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. My body was tired, yes, but my ears were still working just fine. And my heart? Still beating strong beneath all that silence they mistook for surrender. My name is Delilah Mayfield. 74 years old, retired seamstress, proud mother of one son and grandmother to one beautiful boy. I raised Tyrone Crenshaw after his father passed when he was barely 12. We scraped through together. I hemmed skirts all day, baked cornbread and sold it to the church ladies, did whatever I had to do. I never remarried. I gave him my whole life in pieces and I never once asked him to glue them back. But this was something I never saw coming. It started on a Monday morning, still dark outside. I woke up early like always, set water to boil, laid out my dress for revival. The church was holding a week-long prayer fast, and I joined in like I always had. Fasting didn't used to make me lightheaded. But that day my fingers tingled while I was ironing my white blouse. I should have stopped. I should have had a cracker, a sip of juice, something. But I was determined to finish. I don't even remember hitting the floor. One moment I was smoothing sleeves. The next I was waking up under fluorescent lights with tubes in my arm. The nurse said my blood sugar dropped. They kept me overnight for observation. I told them I just needed food. But once Tyrone and Bianca showed up, everything changed. Tyrone acted concerned at first, asking me how I felt, rubbing my arm like I was a patient in hospice. But he kept whispering to the nurses when he thought I couldn't hear. Bianca was worse. She clutched her purse like she was attending a business meeting, not visiting family. "We've been noticing things," she said to the doctor, her voice carrying that tone she used when she wanted to sound responsible. "She's been repeating herself, forgetting dates. We think this has been building for some time." I wanted to speak up, but I was so drowsy from whatever they put in my food that my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. I shook my head. I remember that clearly. I shook my head no, but they didn't see it. Or maybe they didn't want to. By the second night, I was no longer being treated as a patient recovering from a simple fainting spell. I was being evaluated like a case file. Someone scribbled memory observation on my chart. They started asking me questions I didn't understand. Not because I couldn't answer them, but because the questions made no sense for someone who just had low blood sugar. Do you know who the president is? Do you know where you are? Do you feel safe at home? I wanted to shout, yes, yes, of course I do. But they only gave me soup and silence. Tyrone stopped visiting during the day. Bianca stayed. She spoke to the nurses in hushed tones and took calls just outside the door. She thought I couldn't hear, but every sound traveled in that sterile tiled room. I heard her scheduling a meeting at a funeral home. I heard her say lavender and gold, something soft, not too depressing. I heard her ask if she could reserve the church reception hall for a weekend in August. Just in case, she told them. Just in case what? That I didn't wake up in time for my own memorial? Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever felt invisible in your own life. Because that's what they were trying to make me. Invisible. On Thursday they increased my sedative. My body grew heavy again. I knew what was happening. They were buying time. Bianca was asking the doctors to extend my stay. Tyrone emailed my insurance provider and claimed I was experiencing cognitive failure. I knew because I heard the nurse reading his message out loud to another one during shift change. Son says she's not been lucid at home. Wants to explore permanent placement. I wasn't even out of the hospital and already I was being packaged for storage like an old lamp too dusty for display. Elijah came to visit that night. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. My baby, my boy. He slipped into the room after visiting hours, his face pale and serious. He held my hand. He didn't say much, just leaned in close. "I'm here, Grandma," he whispered. "I know what they're doing. I saw the emails." My heart thundered inside my ribs. I squeezed his fingers as tight as I could, not to hold him but to show him I wasn't gone. I was still in here, still listening, still watching. He told me he was going to fix it. I wanted to tell him no, that it wasn't his job, but I was too tired to argue and I didn't want him to stop believing he could save me. When he left, I cried. Not from fear, but from the kind of pain that sits behind your chest when your own child turns on you. I cried because I remembered Tyrone at 5 years old clinging to my dress at the bus stop. I cried because the boy I raised would rather bury me with orchids than ask if I was ready to go. That night I didn't sleep. I watched shadows crawl across the ceiling. I memorized the names of the nurses on their badges. I listened to the machines beep and the janitor's mop wheels squeak and Bianca's voice outside my door saying it would be easier for everyone if we made arrangements now. I wasn't supposed to hear that, but I did. And in that moment I knew I had a choice. I could fade away like they wanted, or I could fight back with whatever strength I had left. I didn't know how, but I knew I wasn't leaving this earth on their terms. Not without a word, not without a witness, and certainly not while I was still breathing. Bianca took the lead in everything. She brought color swatches to the hospital. Literal color swatches. I watched her pull them out of her purse and hold them up in the fluorescent light like she was picking curtains for her living room. "Lavender is peaceful," she said to Tyrone. "But soft gray might be more modern, timeless." I lay there in the hospital bed, eyes half open, trying to convince myself this was just a nightmare. It wasn't. It was a negotiation between a man and his wife about how best to honor a woman who hadn't even passed. I wasn't dead, but my son was already playing executor. He paced the room talking about caterers and parking space at the church. He told the nurse I was non-responsive, even though I had nodded at her that morning when she brought me tea. Tyrone had always been a follower. That boy came into this world soft, sweet, but soft. And Bianca? She was pure granite, polished and cold. Later that day, I heard her in the hallway. "She's had a good life," she said like I was an antique quilt. "She's been declining." "You heard what Dr. Leland said." The nurse murmured something back too low for me to hear. Then Bianca said, "Well, can we at least keep her on observation for another week? Just until the power of attorney clears." That's when I knew she was stalling, waiting for documents to process. That forged paperwork Tyrone had submitted, the one where he claimed I'd given him full medical authority. It hadn't gone through yet, but they were pushing it hard. They had the paperwork in motion, and once it was done, they could move me wherever they pleased. Maybe a home in the suburbs, maybe out of state. Maybe I'd never see my own kitchen window again. If you think what they did was wrong, write justice in the comments. If you think they were just being practical, write 1. But be honest about what you really think. That night they didn't come visit. Maybe they thought sedation would do the talking for them. The nurse, God bless her, hesitated. She held up the needle and looked me in the eyes. I blinked twice. She put the syringe down. Her name was Patrice Freeman. Middle-aged, sharp-browed, and soft-spoken. Something about her reminded me of the women I used to teach Sunday school with. Wise enough to know trouble when it walked into the sanctuary. I didn't say a word, but she sat beside my bed anyway. "You're not crazy," she said barely above a whisper. "And you don't look anywhere near ready for a funeral." Then she squeezed my hand and walked out. That small gesture saved my life. Bianca returned the next morning with fresh lipstick and a new scarf. She breezed in like a woman stepping into her inheritance. She adjusted the flowers on the windowsill and told the nurse she wanted to speak with the attending physician about next steps. When she stepped out, I asked the nurse to call my lawyer. I said it softly. The words tasted like gravel in my throat, but I forced them out. "Call Simone Fairchild," I said. The nurse asked who that was. "My attorney," I told her. "And don't tell my son." She nodded and left. I didn't know if she'd really do it. But 5 hours later, Simone was standing in my doorway with a folder thicker than a church hymnal. She didn't speak to me first. She spoke to the doctor, then the administrator, then to Bianca. who returned from the cafeteria with a cup of tea and a mouthful of false surprise. "Oh, I didn't know Mrs. Fairchild was coming," she said. Simone didn't respond. She handed Bianca an envelope. "Cease and desist. You have no authority over Delilah's medical decisions. I have documentation dated 2 months ago, signed, witnessed, and notarized." Bianca's lips parted. "Well, Tyrone." Simone cut her off. "Is not here, and even if he were, he doesn't have a say." Bianca's face froze. She looked like someone who just bet the house and lost everything but her shoes. That night, the doctor came in and told me I was being discharged in the morning. "You're stable," he said. "Lucid, and frankly, we should have let you go 2 days ago." I wanted to laugh, but my throat still burned from the 4 fluids. Nurse Patrice wheeled me down to the lobby herself. She asked if I had someone to stay with. "Yes," I said. "I have a lawyer." She smiled wide at that. "Well, now I know you're just fine." Simone didn't take me home. Not yet. We drove to her place, a quiet colonial house with a screened-in porch and a garden full of azaleas. She helped me settle into the guest room and handed me a cup of tea. "They've been planning this for months," she said, laying out the documents on the table. Real estate evaluations, quiet calls to care facilities, a scheduled meeting with the funeral director. She paused. "Delilah. They even picked out the music." I stared at the papers. "What song?" I asked. Simone hesitated. "Amazing Grace, the gospel version. Bianca emailed the organist last week." I sat with that for a long while. That they had chosen my final song before God even had the chance to. Then Simone leaned forward. "There's more." She opened a second folder. Inside were printed screenshots, emails, voice notes, digital messages forwarded by someone named Elijah Crenshaw. My grandson. He had sent everything to Simone directly. Every time Bianca badmouthed me behind my back. Every time she told Tyrone I was unstable. Every plan she laid out as if I were already in the ground. Elijah had seen it all. My hands trembled as I held those papers. Not from anger, not from grief, but from the slow, steady realization that the child I raised, the child I gave my life to, had allowed his wife to turn him into my undertaker. And worse, he hadn't even brought a shovel. He let her do the digging. He just nodded along and handed her the map. I set the folder down, took a deep breath. Then I looked Simone straight in the eye and said, "Get me my will. We're going to rewrite everything." She nodded, already pulling out her pen. "And one more thing," I added. "Leave Elijah in. Make him my emergency contact. He's the only one who held my hand." Simone smiled. "Consider it done. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had someone fight for you when you couldn't fight for yourself. Because that's what real love looks like." I sat in Simone's guest room, staring out at her garden for what felt like hours. My mind kept drifting back to that hospital room, the sterile light, the sound of Bianca's voice behind the curtain, talking like she was planning a brunch menu instead of a burial. I thought about the moment Elijah squeezed my hand, the desperation in his voice when he whispered, "Don't leave me." That boy wasn't just scared. He knew something. He'd seen something. And he had done something about it. If Simone hadn't shown me those screenshots, I never would have believed it. My grandson had forwarded every message, every email, every voice memo he could find between his daddy and that woman. He'd risked everything to tell the truth. One email stayed with me more than the others. Bianca had written to the funeral director, "We'll need a full service package. Tent rental, lavender linens, organist, slideshow presentation. We're looking at the second weekend in August. Pending release." Pending release. I stared at those words so long they started to blur. I knew what she meant. Pending the hospital releasing me, either in body or in ashes. They weren't going to wait for a natural goodbye. They were buying time and trying to push me off the edge before I could push back. Simone and I worked around the clock. She reviewed my original will and helped me rewrite everything from scratch. I removed Tyrone completely. Not a dollar, not a chair, not a photograph. I added the local women's shelter as the primary beneficiary of my estate. I'd sewn their uniforms for years, donated what I could when the weather turned cold. They'd do more good with my house than anyone else. I added a contingency clause too. If any harm came to me under suspicious or accelerated circumstances, Everything would be placed in a trust under Elijah's name with Simone as the executor. Tyrone wouldn't even be allowed to contest it. Bianca's name was never mentioned. I didn't need to dignify her with paper. She was already out of my blood. We made copies, sent them to the county clerk, filed one with the courthouse. Simone had every angle covered. I hadn't felt this safe in years. Then came the letter, delivered by certified mail to Simone's front porch. Tyrone's handwriting. Sloppy. Angry. Inside was a single page. Mama, I don't know what Simone is telling you, but we're just trying to help. You need rest. Bianca's been stressed trying to take care of everything. Please stop acting like we're the enemy. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was sad. That boy still didn't realize who he'd married or what she'd done. And maybe he didn't want to know. Elijah texted Simone the next morning. He said Bianca was asking questions, suspicious, restless. She had noticed the hospital discharge. She was trying to track where I was staying. Elijah kept his answers short, neutral, but he was afraid. She's different now, he wrote. She's pushing him hard. Talking about lawsuits, about making you look unfit. I told Simone it was time. I wanted to go home. She raised an eyebrow. You sure? I nodded. They need to see me standing. She made the arrangements. Nurse Patrice from the hospital even offered to stop by and check on me once a week. Just say the word, she told Simone. Women like Mrs. Mayfield don't come around often. I smiled at that. It was the first time in weeks I'd smiled without forcing it. I went back to my house on a Tuesday afternoon. The sun was shining. The garden was dry. My porch swing creaked the way it always had. But something was different. The air was too still. Like the house had been waiting for me to return and finally exhaled. Inside, the walls smelled like fresh paint. The guest room had new curtains. My dining table was gone, replaced with a sleek glass one I'd never seen before. Bianca had been redecorating, already moving in, claiming space that wasn't hers. I opened my bedroom door and found a half-empty suitcase on the floor. My dresses folded like hotel linens. My jewelry box open. I didn't get angry. I got quiet. The kind of quiet that hums beneath the surface like water just before it boils. Simone joined me later that evening. She brought copies of the will and a recorder. Elijah showed up too, holding a box of my favorite shortbread cookies and a face full of guilt. Grandma, he said, eyes brimming. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go against Dad, but I couldn't let them do this to you. I touched his cheek. You did exactly what you were supposed to, baby. And I meant it. That boy had more sense in him than his father ever did. We spent the night preparing. Simone explained everything to Elijah. She gave him a copy of the new will, the clause about the shelter, the trust in his name. You're her protection now, she said. Legally and spiritually. He nodded, standing a little taller than he had before. We agreed not to say anything until they showed up. No warning, no confrontation until I was ready. But something told me they'd come soon. Bianca was too controlling to let things sit. And Tyrone, well, he didn't know how to stop anything once it was already moving. He just followed the strongest voice in the room. I laid out my Sunday dress that night. Not for service. For battle. The next morning the doorbell rang. I didn't move. Elijah peeked through the curtain. It's them, he said. I smoothed my dress, walked to the door, and opened it like I owned the ground they were standing on. Because I did. The moment I opened the door and saw them standing there, Tyrone holding a folder, Bianca gripping her handbag like it was armor, I knew they hadn't come to apologize. Not yet. Bianca had that look again, the one she always wore when she was lying but didn't think you were smart enough to catch her. Her eyes did a quick scan of the living room behind me, and I could already see her disappointment. My chest was rising. My arms weren't trembling. My voice hadn't failed. I was still standing, and that ruined the script she had planned. Tyrone tried to play warm. Mama, he said. We just came by to check on you. We were a bit concerned when the hospital said you'd been discharged without notifying us. I didn't invite them in. I stood tall in the doorway and stared at him. You mean concerned that I got out before you could finish rewriting my life? He blinked like a child who just touched a hot stove. Bianca stepped forward, plastering on a smile. We didn't mean to upset you, Delilah. We were just trying to help during a difficult time. Her voice was syrup too sweet to trust. I leaned slightly toward her and said, "You don't help people by planning their funeral behind their back." Her smile cracked just a little. Then Simone appeared behind me. "Good evening, Mr. Crenshaw," she said, nodding at Tyrone. "I'm here as Mrs. Mayfield's legal counsel. If you're here to speak about her care, I suggest you speak to me directly." Bianca's lips parted. She wasn't expecting Simone. Tyrone took a breath and looked at the folder in his hands. "I brought copies of some forms we submitted. Healthcare proxy, insurance adjustments." Simone cut him off. "Those documents were submitted fraudulently. We have voice recordings, emails, and third-party statements proving coercion. If you push this further, I will press charges." Tyrone hesitated. His hand lowered slowly. "Mama," he said softer now. "I didn't know we thought." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me so the neighbors wouldn't hear what I was about to say. "You thought I was slipping. You thought you could move in while I was still under sedation. You thought you could gut my home and host a slideshow about my life like I wasn't still living it." I took another step forward. "You thought wrong." Tyrone looked down. Bianca didn't flinch. She was still calculating, watching Simone out of the corner of her eye, measuring outcomes like a courtroom strategist. I turned to her next. "And you," I said. "You picked out a color palette for my coffin." She didn't deny it. She just said, "You wouldn't have wanted something gloomy." Tyrone turned to her then for the first time. "Wait, what?" Bianca blinked. "I told you I just wanted to be prepared. Just in case." Simone stepped in between them. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said. "You both attempted to place Mrs. Mayfield in a care facility without legal authority. You coordinated with a funeral home. You requested information about end-of-life care. And you tried to forge medical authority through a fake power of attorney. That's elder abuse and it's a felony." Tyrone paled. Bianca turned away, muttering something about not being involved in all of that. Simone pulled a second envelope from her purse. "This is a legal cease and desist. And this," she handed it to Bianca, "is a notarized witness statement from a nurse at the hospital who overheard you asking about euthanasia protocols." Bianca's jaw dropped. "I never said that," she snapped, but her voice cracked just enough. "You asked how long she could be kept in a medically sedated state," Simone said, "and whether doctors had any compassionate options if the family was ready to say goodbye. That nurse wrote it all down." Tyrone looked at her like he didn't recognize the woman he married. He didn't. Not until that moment. Share this with someone who needs to hear that silence doesn't mean weakness. Because sometimes the quietest people are planning the loudest comebacks. They left soon after. Bianca walked fast, her heels tapping down my porch like she was late for a meeting. Tyrone lingered. He looked at me one last time before following her. I saw something flicker in his eyes. Shame maybe, or guilt, but I didn't say anything. I closed the door gently behind them and turned to Elijah, who'd been watching from the stairs. "You did good," I told him. "You were brave." He sat on the last step and exhaled hard like he'd been holding his breath since they rang the doorbell. "They were going to take everything, Grandma," he said. "Even you." I nodded. "But not today." That night, Simone stayed for dinner. We ate in the dining room Bianca had tried to repaint. I served the meal on my mother's old china. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or the shelter clause or the next steps. We just sat and chewed and breathed like free people. Later, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I walked through the hallway and opened the guest room closet. Inside were boxes. One of them had the word slideshow scrawled on the front in Bianca's handwriting. I opened it. Inside were printed photographs of me. Young, old, smiling, tired. Some I hadn't seen in decades. A copy of my wedding photo. A photo of me holding Tyrone at his high school graduation. There was a USB stick taped to the top flap. I walked it over to the living room and plugged it into Simone's laptop. Elijah sat beside me. The screen lit up. A title faded in. Celebrating the Life of Delilah Mayfield. Music played softly. Yes, Amazing Grace, like Simone had said. Then came the slides. My life carefully arranged by someone who had already buried me in her mind. There were captions. "Beloved matriarch, faithful servant, gone too soon," Elijah whispered. They made this while you were still in the hospital. I nodded. They had it all ready. All they needed was a reason to press play. I closed the laptop, walked to the porch, sat on the swing, and let the summer air wrap around me like a shawl. And I waited because I knew this story wasn't over. Not yet. The following Sunday, Tyrone came back alone. No Bianca, no folder in his hand, no rehearsed smile. Just him in an old gray suit I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. It hung looser on him now, like the guilt had stretched him thin. He rang the bell once, then waited. I didn't answer right away. I watched him from the kitchen window for a while, just to see if he'd fidget, if he'd turn away. He didn't. He just stood there, still like a boy who knew his mama had every right to shut the door in his face. When I finally opened it, I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. He nodded. "Mama," he said, "can I talk to you?" I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table like he used to when he was young, back when he'd come home late from school and try to hide a bad grade behind small talk. He kept his hands folded in front of him like he didn't trust them not to tremble. "I didn't know," he said softly. "Not really. I thought you were tired. That maybe Bianca was right. That you needed help." I stayed standing. I let him talk. "She told me things. Said you were confused. Said you'd been calling her by the wrong name, that you forgot what day it was." He glanced up at me. I believed her because I didn't check for myself. He pulled something from his pocket. A printed email. He slid it across the table. "She wrote this the day after you fainted. Told the funeral home to confirm our deposit." I didn't touch the paper. I didn't need to. I'd already seen enough lies to last me the rest of my life. She said she wanted to be prepared. Said it was practical. Said you would have wanted it. He shook his head. She even suggested you told her once you didn't want to live hooked up to machines. My jaw clenched. My legs ached from standing, but I didn't sit. I didn't move. I wanted every second of his guilt to land exactly where it belonged. "You believed all of it," I said, my voice steady. "Every word from a woman who never once asked me how I was feeling. A woman who rearranged my house while I was still breathing. A woman who tried to erase me before I'd even been discharged." He dropped his gaze again. "I let her get in my head," he said. "I let her convince me I was being merciful." He pulled another paper from his pocket. A court document. Divorce petition already filed. I raised my eyebrows. "That fast?" He nodded. "After Simone showed us the recordings, after I saw the slideshow, I knew it had gone too far. But I also knew it had been going on longer than I wanted to admit. She's been talking bad about you for years. Every little thing you said, she twisted. She told me you once said I was ungrateful, and that you were thinking of moving away without telling me. I believed that too because I didn't want to believe I'd married a liar." He took a breath. "I've been a fool." There was the confession. I walked over to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. My hands didn't shake. My back didn't hunch. I felt taller than I had in months. "You know what hurts the most?" I said. "It's not the lies. Not even the funeral you planned behind my back. It's that you didn't recognize me anymore. You looked at your mother, and didn't think to ask if any of it made sense. You didn't fight for me, Tyrone. You just stepped aside and let her start digging." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm sorry, Mama. I am. And I know sorry isn't enough. It wasn't, but it was something." I didn't speak. I let the silence hang there between us like a question no one wanted to answer. Then he said, "You didn't deserve any of this." That much was true. Before he left, he looked around the kitchen one last time. His eyes lingered on the photo of us on the wall. Him as a teenager holding up his college acceptance letter. Me standing beside him with tears in my eyes. "I miss her," he said quietly. "The version of me you were proud of." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not yet. He left without asking for forgiveness. And I was glad. That night I sat on the porch swing, the sky bruised with sunset. Elijah came outside and handed me a blanket. "He really filed?" he asked. I nodded. He finally saw the truth. Elijah sat beside me. "I never liked her," he said. "Not even when I was little. She always looked at you like you were in the way." I chuckled softly. She looked at a lot of things that way. The crickets started chirping. The breeze carried the smell of jasmine across the yard. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt peace settle into my bones. Tyrone had started to wake up, but he still had to live with the grave he helped dig. The days moved slower after that. The sun rose softer. My coffee stayed hotter in the cup. It's funny how peace shows up in little ways after chaos has been kicked out the door. Elijah came by every day after school. He'd do his homework at the dining table while I cooked, or sometimes we'd just sit in the living room with the news playing low in the background. He never asked for anything. He just stayed near like he knew I needed company that didn't come with expectations or fake apologies. Tyrone didn't return for a while and I didn't ask after him. Simone kept me updated on the legal paperwork. Bianca's name had been taken off every document and the house was now fully in my name with a secondary trust assigned to Elijah. My updated will had been filed and certified. There were no loopholes left to crawl through. Everything that mattered was finally protected. The slideshow box sat untouched in the hallway closet. Some nights I thought about tossing it out, just dragging it to the curb and letting the garbage truck take it with the rest of the lies. But part of me kept it there as a reminder. Not of what they did, but of how close I came to being erased by the people I once fed with both hands. That slideshow had my life in it. My photos, my family, my memories. And I deserved to decide how that story ended. Then came the call. Tyrone's voice on the line, quiet and breathless. "Mama, can I come see you?" I paused before answering. I didn't ask why. I just said yes. He arrived looking thinner. Not in the body, but in the spirit, like he'd been emptied out. He stood on the porch in the same suit he wore last time, though now the shoulders looked heavier. He didn't bring flowers. Just a folder. Not legal papers this time. Inside were photos. Real ones. Of him and Elijah at the park. Of him helping Elijah fix a bike. One of him as a boy riding on my back while I crouched in the grass, laughing. He laid them on the coffee table one by one, like puzzle pieces he was trying to put back together. "I've been seeing a counselor," he said. It was Elijah's idea. He said I had things to unpack. He gave a nervous chuckle. Turns out he was right. I watched him carefully. "And what did you find in those boxes you unpacked?" I asked. He looked down. I found her voice, Bianca's, still ringing in my head, telling me you were selfish, telling me you didn't trust me, telling me you were always 2 steps from slipping. He paused. And I found out how easy it is to believe the wrong voice when the right one gets quiet. He swallowed hard. "Mama, I never should have let her speak over you." I still said nothing. Let the quiet do the heavy lifting. He continued. "She told me once you said I ruined your life, that having me kept you from happiness. I asked her when you said that. She said she couldn't remember. Just that you did." He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot. "But I remember what you really said, Mama. When I was 13 and cried because I didn't have new shoes for school. You said, 'I didn't give you everything, but I gave you what I had, and I'd do it again barefoot if I had to.'" He choked on that memory. "That's what you said." And I let her twist it into something ugly. The tears came freely then. No pride to hold them back. He knelt on the floor in front of me just like he did when he was a boy, begging not to be punished. But this time the punishment had already come and he had lived it. "I lost my marriage," he said. "But that doesn't compare to almost losing you." I looked at him long and slow. He waited for my answer but I said nothing. Just reached out and placed my hand gently on his head. Not to forgive, not to fix, but to remind him what a mother's touch feels like after all the noise has faded. He stayed there for a moment quiet and still. Then Elijah entered the room and saw us like that. He didn't say anything either, just walked over and wrapped his arms around both of us. He held me like he had in the hospital, back when I was slipping beneath the surface. But now we were above it, all of us breathing again. And that's when I knew love doesn't always roar when it returns. Sometimes it just rests its head in your lap and stays quiet. When Tyrone left that evening, he didn't ask if he was back in the will. He didn't ask for keys or anything else. He just kissed my forehead and walked away like a man trying to earn back the right to be called son. I sat on the porch after he left, wrapped in my shawl, the breeze tugging at the hem of my skirt. The world looked softer. Not healed but softer. I glanced toward the garden where new buds were beginning to bloom. Red ones, the kind his daddy used to plant. People ask me sometimes if I ever forgave Tyrone. I don't answer because forgiveness isn't something you shout into the air like a sermon. Something you plant. And if it grows in silence. But inside me, in that quiet place only a mother knows, I still love my son. Even after everything. Because I'm still breathing. And some things, some people are worth loving even after they forget how to love you back. The truth is, they tried to bury me while I was still alive. They picked out flowers and songs and speeches. They counted my money and divided my things. They measured my coffin and reserved my grave. But they forgot one thing. They forgot to ask if I was ready to go. I wasn't. I'm not. And as long as there's breath in my body and fight in my bones, I'll keep telling this story. Because somewhere out there is another grandmother sitting in a hospital bed, hearing whispers behind curtains, wondering if the people she raised with her own hands are planning her goodbye. To that woman I say this. Don't close your eyes if you're not ready. Don't let them choose your ending. And if you can't find your voice, find someone who will use theirs for you. Like this video if you believe every elder deserves dignity. Subscribe if you think stories like mine need to be heard. And comment below. Tell me where you're listening from because I want to know there are still people out there who understand that being old doesn't mean being done. Share this with someone who needs to remember that family isn't always blood. And blood isn't always family. Sometimes the people who love you most are the ones who refuse to let you disappear. I'm Delilah Mayfield, 74 years old, retired seamstress, proud grandmother, and still very much alive. My son learned the hard way that you can't bury someone who refuses to lie down. And if you take nothing else from my story, take this. Never let anyone write your obituary while you're still breathing. That pen belongs in your hands, not theirs. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And thank you for reminding me that even when the people closest to you stop seeing you, there are still strangers in the world who will hear you. Now go hug your grandmother. And if she's gone, say her name out loud. Because that's how we keep the good ones alive. And that's how we make sure the real stories get told.